Good. Hello. Oh, goodness gracious. Well, it was off to a rough start here. Anyway, that is what live streaming sometimes does to you. My name is Andrew Smith, and I am here speaking as a tax-paying voter and citizen of the state of Tennessee. I've lived in Tennessee since 1995. I also happen to work at Tennessee Tech University for my day job. And I'm speaking here also in my role as the campus chapter president of the American Association of University Professors and a member of the United Campus Workers Union, Communication Workers of America, the Higher Ed Union for Tennessee, just as a rank and file member of that union. And these are my views and my views alone. They do not represent the rest of my AAUP chapter. They don't represent UCW per se or Tennessee Tech, my employer. But I want to talk to you guys today about the Tennessee Higher Education Subcommittee that met yesterday on Tuesday, February 15th. And I'm going to be talking about what is being known as the Divisive Concepts Bill. And this, if you've been following the news at all, this is part of the CRT or critical race theory panic that is sweeping our country. And bills are being introduced in legislatures across the United States to address this perceived ideological panic in higher education in my state, all over the country. And they've already passed these laws through the K-12 system, and we just knew that they were coming for us. And so yesterday I live streamed to my home where I'm working from home right now, the video of this committee meeting. And they rolled out all the other bills to future discussion. So the only bill that was being discussed yesterday, House Bill 2670, I believe it is, the Divisive Concepts Bill. That was the only bill that was discussed in yesterday's meeting, and it passed. It passed right on through. So the man who was at the podium was Representative Gant. He's not on the Higher Ed Committee, but he was there on Tuesday. He said he was carrying the bill for Speaker Sexton because it is dear to him. And I think he meant the bill is dear to Speaker Sexton. It appears to be very dear to Representative Gant as well. I went on Representative Gant's Facebook page, and it's just typical Republican talking points, anti-abortion, pro-business, pro-police. And then he just kind of likes to sprinkle some Bible verses in there. So he's a Bible-believing Republican politician from Tennessee, which seems to be the gist here. The conservative kind of white Christian nationalist movement is very firm here in Tennessee. So this bill seems to take place as what they believe are the inherent divisive concepts in certain pedagogical ideas, teaching ideas. And the sponsors seem to believe that these concepts disrupt their entirely superficial notion of civic unity. So you can't have civic unity if you have these disruptive concepts in the classroom. With some due diligence, I was able to find the most vivid language of the proposed law, which resembles similar legislation sweeping our red or Republican states. The law explicitly prohibits concepts like these. And I'm going to quote some of the concepts that are explicitly prohibited by this bill that passed subcommittee yesterday. They said an individual by virtue of the individual's race or sex is inherently privileged, racist, sexist, oppressive, whether consciously or subconsciously. So if we as white folks are subconsciously racist by being white folks in a white supremacist anti-Black society, that's wrong. An individual should be discriminated against or receive adverse treatment because of the individual's race or sex. Now, that's just boilerplate anti-discrimination language. And so one of the things that can be confusing about these bills is that they steal the language of the civil rights movement, and then they sort of shred it and then reconstitute it as something else entirely than what was intended by the original framers of civil rights legislation. They're against an individual's moral character being determined by their race or sex. They're against an individual by virtue of the individual's race or sex bearing responsibility for actions committed in the past by other members of the same race or sex. And so collective responsibility for reparations and repentance is no longer allowed to be talked about. So the idea that we as a nation bear any responsibility for our nation's past collectively at all, period, is a goner. An individual should feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or another form of psychological distress solely because of an individual's race or sex. And so this idea that we and again, these are the people that were against snowflakes, against safe spaces. A couple years ago, when there was the desire to create a safe space, these people were against it. They were vigorously against the creation of safe spaces on campus. But now they need to have a safe space for white folk, that white folks should not feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any psychological distress because of the facts of imperialism and colonialism, because of the facts of white supremacy, white nationalism, and anti-blackness, because of the facts of slavery, because of the facts of the school to prison pipeline, because of the facts of mass incarceration. These are facts, folks. These things exist in our society. And if we talk about these and the result, the consequence of telling the truth is that anybody feels uncomfortable at any time, this is apparently not okay. It is wrong that a meritocracy is inherently racist or sexist or designed by a particular race or sex to oppress another race or sex. So this is the idea of inherited wealth. So slavery was back then. Well, there's inherited wealth that is descended directly through a certain kind of lineage here in the South, and there's certain customs and manners and ways of being that have descended directly from the inherited wealth. So, and if you inherited your wealth, is that a meritocracy? Well, I don't know what it is. They claim that it is. I got here by my own bootstraps and daddy's donations, you know. So that's what the law is against. Those are the concepts that the law is against. Now, let me tell you what happened yesterday. This is very illuminating. Representative Charlie Baum, who is an economics professor at MTSU, posed a hypothetical scenario. Now, since he is an economics professor at MTSU and a conservative Republican, I don't think this scenario was hypothetical at all. He said this, and it sounds like one of his classes. He said, well, let's have a comparison and contrast context in my economics class between Marxism and the free market. And so that's what he's posing, okay? So he's going to be teaching as a professor the difference between Marxism and the free market in his classroom. In his narrative that he described, and it was kind of compelling in its own kind of gross way, the free market is unequivocally celebrated and Marxism is clearly denounced. And then Representative Gant, who had the podium and was chairing this discussion, said, quote, "We are actually okay talking about divisive concepts without indoctrination." So it was apparently lost on him and the entire room that this passionate promotion of capitalism as the superior system and the strident denunciation of socialism, that was in no way divisive or indoctrination. So my takeaway from that part of the discussion is that our indoctrination, white capitalist, supremacy, is fine, but their indoctrination, actually critical concepts that challenge these, their indoctrination is not. Got it. So this is really, really distressful to me watching this, and I'm trying to keep it together. And then I see that the meaningful questions get asked, and there's two representatives, Representative Hakeem and Representative Parkinson from Chattanooga and Memphis, respectively. These are the Black urban representatives in the room, African-American gentlemen, very articulate, and they ask the hard questions. And so I'm just going to run through some of the questions that were posed by Representative Hakeem and Representative Parkinson. And I'm not in their districts, but I want to thank these colleagues. I want to thank them for speaking for me as a citizen of Tennessee, as an educator in Tennessee. I want to thank and say, Representative Parkinson and Representative Hakeem, you spoke for me yesterday, and I appreciate you very much for what you said yesterday. Representative Hakeem from Chattanooga, he jumped right into the core of it. He said, can critical race theory still be taught at the university level? Gant says it can be. So this is interesting because I know I don't teach critical race theory, but I know there are folk at Austin Peay and University of Tennessee, Knoxville, that do teach these concepts of critical race theory. He said it can be. But the bill specifically says that it can't, some of the concepts of it cannot be. Then Representative Hakeem followed up and he said, how can you have, and I want you all to hear what Representative Hakeem said. He said, how can you all have freedom of speech if there's a list of concepts that you are not allowed to talk about? How can you have freedom, academic freedom of speech, if there's a list of things that you're not allowed to say? Hakeem again said, is your bill an emotional reaction to CRT? Well, we think it is, right? I mean, is there any evidence about the consequences of these concepts being exposed to students? What's the evidence of the the consequences? I mean, I guess you could say the part of the evidence is the massive $1 million success of some of these right wing think tanks and movements that have taken hold in our universities. That have been advocacy groups within our universities for a pro-white nationalist, for a anti-black, for a free market agenda, pro-big business agenda. Representative Parkinson contrasts this bill with other things on the Republican agenda. Now this gets real here. And I hope that my dear colleague Justin Canoe of the Tennessee Holler will take this and look at this. I've asked him to look at this. He's probably doesn't sleep. I don't know. They're working full time, pointing out all the horrible things that are going through our legislature. So he maybe just hasn't got to this one yet. But I hope the Hollers will get to this, because Representative Parkinson said, well, what about this informed patriotism deal that the governor wants at University of Tennessee, UT Knoxville? How does that work with this law? And what he's implying here is that this informed patriotism stuff is creating a specific space that they're going into. And then Representative Parkinson creates an alternate scenario. What if over at Memphis we created an institute to study slavery in America? Would that not run afoul with this legislation of divisive concepts? Representative Gant, who again had the podium, he would not engage Parkinson on this point. But what he said was very interesting. He says, I do not want to intersect the governor's legislation about civic education into this one. And then in the same breath, Representative Gant admitted that he is actively helping to promote the Informed Patriotism Institute elsewhere. The question behind Parkinson's questions echo my questions. Okay, how can you call one form of critical education indoctrination and then create an entire institute or think tank for another form of indoctrination, which is this Hillsdale model from Michigan, this informed patriotism model, which is a white supremacist Christian nationalist worldview? Straight up, that's what it is. I'm not making this up. You go look at Hillsdale College and see what they're about. Parkinson continued, he said, I am concerned that we are actually stifling conversations when we are regulating conversations. I hope we can stay in the space where we can discuss all of these issues, which is what I'm doing, with this live stream here. We want the truth being spoken, but some of our history is uncomfortable. Gant doubled down. We don't want students to be required to espouse an ideology, to be required to graduate. Well, that's not happening, and that's never happened. And this is a very conservative state. And so some of our institutions, like the one that I work at, has a very conservative workplace culture. So nobody's required to espouse an ideology to graduate. That's never been a thing. And so this bill is attacking and addressing a thing that just flatly does not exist, right? There is no ideology statement that a person is required to make, but by imposing a bill about a non-existent problem, they actually are implying that their ideology must be ascribed to work in public education in Tennessee. And so they're actually doing with this bill for the far right, what they actually are attacking on this non-existent far left, because we live in Tennessee. My district went 71% for the former president in the last federal election. We're not living in a hotbed, of liberalism. And because I believe in the integrity of everyone and I love my enemies like Jesus taught me to, I never impose my views on my students. We bring up difficult topics because they're germane to the curriculum, but we don't impose, we don't call out. We don't make students feel, that they're called out for having a disagreement with the teacher. I encourage the disagreement in my classroom, and I support my conservative students. And here's the thing: I'm a profoundly and a deeply religious person. I'm a spiritual person. I love religion and theology. I have a degree in theology. I'm a former pastor. And so this idea, that we're trying to shut down religion. I mean, I taught a class on the Bible, so, and religious studies at my institution. So this idea that this is kind of some setup to chase people out of their being their true selves and leaning into their true selves and not being empowered to be their true selves. That's just not happening, as far as I can tell, in any of our classrooms. So the divisive concepts bill passed out of the subcommittee by voice vote. I could tell by his hand being raised that Representative Hakeem was a no, but it was unclear from the video if Parkinson also dissented or abstained. But this is going forward. This divisive concept bill is not dead. It's going on. So I'm incredibly grateful to these two Black representatives who were engaged and asked the hard questions. It is also obvious that ideology is celebrated on one side, informed patriotism. The free market is much better than Marxism, unequivocally, the one representative said that, who is a professor. So he's already teaching his ideology in the classroom. He owned himself in that regard, right? So it's okay to teach ideology if it's their ideology, the right ideology. It is crystal clear to me now, as an instructor of English and religious studies in our public higher education system, where these so-called difficult concepts are germane to the curriculum in my classes, as other humanities classes taught by my colleagues and friends. They are gunning for us. If you teach sociology, psychology, history, political science, rhetoric, philosophy, and these difficult concepts are germane to your curriculum, they're gunning for you. I've heard my other colleagues say, I'm going to keep teaching my courses as they need to be taught. Let them come for me. But I cannot understate what a hard day this is for all of us to be public education professionals in Tennessee. They're coming for the teachers. Like the old Martin Niemöller quote said about them coming for the socialists, the unionists, and the Jews. They are coming for the teachers. And so I ask you, will you stand with us? Who will stand with the teachers of Tennessee? Will you stand with the teachers of Tennessee? Who will speak for us and with us? We are asking for your solidarity in this time. Stand with the teachers. There's no idea is off limits. No idea is going to blow this thing up. It is the suppression of ideas and the selective deployment of words like ideology that are so harmful right now to the hope that I bring to my job every single day. I'm Andrew Smith, instructor at Tennessee Tech. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I'm not speaking as a member of Tennessee Tech. I'm speaking as a citizen and as a voter and as a person who pays taxes in the state. And I'm speaking to those legislators, which is my not only my responsibility, is my duty as a citizen to do so. Thank you.